Welcome everyone to CloudSEK knowledge sharing sessions, which we conduct on every Wednesdays at 6. We on this day discuss particular topics from cybersecurity, AI, threat intelligence, infra, product management, and so on that we deals every day. Today we have Nitya, our product manager for user experience and engineering. She'll be talking about startup success stories from innovative companies, a talk that peeks into interesting practices at companies that went from startup to being some of the most successful of our age. Over to you, Nitya.
Thank you, Sahil. I hope everyone can hear me. Great. Let me just share my screen. Hello, everyone. Thank you for taking the time to come and attend this talk. My name is Nitya, and I work as a product manager in CloudSEK. Today, I'll be talking about.
You are sharing the wrong screen, I guess.
Yeah. Okay. Sorry. Um, Sahil, can you see the correct screen?
Yep.
Okay. Great. Let me start.
Nitya,
Today,
you're
I'll be
not
talking
audible.
about. Is this? Can you hear me now? Great, great. Okay. Today I'll be talking about startup success stories from innovative companies. If you look at any company in the world, it was a startup and then it went on to do some amazing things. We all have things that we can learn from these companies, both individually as well as collectively as an organization. I think it's very important to have a company growth mindset that would allow us to be open to look outside for ideas and be inspired. This talk is a compilation of things that I've read, things that I've heard, and things I've learned from interactions with experienced people working in these companies. The talk is divided into three main parts. In part one, we will look at how creativity is encouraged in an incumbent. Let's look at how Google manages to be creative over and over again. In part two, we will see how Uber solved the chicken and egg problem and how it went on to manage platform dynamics. Finally, in part three, we'll talk about Netflix, disruptive innovation in Netflix, and how Netflix overcame the innovator's dilemma. Now let's get started with part one. How does Google foster creativity? I want to start with an activity, an exercise I hope everyone will participate in. I will run you through a scenario, and at the end, I will release a poll. Please vote either yes or no to the question I ask. Let's start. This is the Ringelmann experiment. Max Ringelmann was a German researcher, and he conducted this experiment in 1913. He had people alone and in groups pull on a rope. The force generated in each trial was measured by the researcher. In the first scenario, as you can see on the slide, he asked a single person to pull on the rope. He then measured the force. The researcher then asks two more people to join the first man. Now, this is a group of three, as you can see. He then asks the group to pull on the rope and he measures the force again. He then asks five more people to join. Now it's a group of 8 people. He asks the group to pull on the rope again and he measures the force. In the first scenario, when a single person was pulling on the rope, he measured the force as 63 kilograms. Now, rope pulling is an additive task. That means the total amount that could be pulled by the group should be equal to the sum of the contributions of each individual. So the hypothesis that the researcher had for the group of 3 was that the force would be equal to the sum of the contribution of each of the 3 individuals. That is 63 plus 63 plus 63, which is 189 kilograms. In the same way, when it was 8 people, his hypothesis was that the force would be the sum of the contributions of each 8 of them. So that is 63 plus 63 and so on 8 times, 63 into 8, which is 504 kilograms. Now let's test the researcher's hypothesis. So what he worked with was that if a single person pulled with a force of 63 kilograms, three people would pull with a force of 189 kilograms. So what do you think? Do you think this hypothesis is correct? One thing I can tell you for certain is that the force with which the group of 3 was not exactly equal to 189. It was either slightly less or slightly more than that. Now, this is the question for the poll. If you think that the group of 3 pulled with a force greater than 189 kilograms, that is, the group pulled the rope harder when they were in the group of 3 rather than when they pulled alone, please vote a thumbs up. On the contrary, if you think that the group of 3 pulled with a force lesser than 189 kilograms, that is, people pulled the rope less harder when they were in the group rather than when they were alone, please vote a thumbs down. So Sahil will release a poll where you can vote a thumbs down or a thumbs up. Sahil?
So 30, it was 60-40. 40 people thought that it's yes, 40 percentage, and now it's 41% people think that is yes, that is thumbs up, and 57 thumbs down.
Okay, great. So the majority in the group answer correct. The correct answer is thumbs down. So the correct answer was that people pulled less harder in the group rather than alone. Let's see what the researcher found exactly. So in the group of he found was that instead of 189 kilograms, they pulled with a force of only 160, much less than what he thought. It was only 85% of their expected capability. Now, when it came to the group of 8, the results were even worse. Instead of 504 kilograms, they pulled with a force of only 248, which was half, 49% of their expected capability. Now, what could be the reason for this? The reason is known to be social loafing, a very common phenomenon where a person is likely to put in less effort when he is in a group rather than alone. In a group, people are much less motivated to work as hard as they would have done if they were working alone. This leads us to the first question, why creativity is so difficult in organizations. Social loafing is a big barrier to creativity because people are not motivated to think outside the box and be proactive about creativity. They conveniently feel like someone else would take on the responsibility. Instead, they tend to focus on short-term goals at the expense of everything else. Now let's move on to the second reason why creativity is so difficult. A phenomenon called groupthink. To understand groupthink, I'm using a famous example, the Challenger space shuttle disaster. A little context about this. The Challenger was built by NASA in 1986. It was a tragedy as it crashed immediately after it took off. The reason for the crash is attributed to groupthink. Now I have a short video which will explain what happened.
Yet another costly red faces all around space shuttle launch delay.
Why do group decisions sometimes result in monumental error? What drives groups to make decisions against their better judgment? Using the story of the Space Shuttle Challenger, this video explores the phenomenon of groupthink, in which group members seek unanimous agreement despite their own individual doubts.
Since Flight 17, we know something we didn't know before. The primary O-ring can fail completely.
The shuttle has flown 19 times and it's come back 19 times.
Our job isn't to run around like Chicken Little hollering the sky is falling. It's to keep that shuttle flying.
Dr. James K. Esser identifies the 8 symptoms of groupthink.
When more of these symptoms are present, the likelihood is greater that groupthink has occurred, and therefore the probability is higher that any resulting decision will be unsuccessful, possibly even catastrophic.
It's time to make a decision. Bob, take off your engineer's hat and put on your management hat. Does anyone in the loop have a different position? Even though we had some concerns about the low temperatures, we now recommend proceeding with the launch.
With this powerful video, viewers will learn how to avoid unwanted organizational actions by making decisions that truly reflect a team consensus.
The official inquiry into the Challenger disaster found a serious flaw in the decision-making process leading up to the launch. As we saw in the video, many engineers had concerns about the safety of launching the Challenger, but felt compelled to go with the group opinion. There is a very interesting documentary on Netflix. It's called Challenger: The Final Flight, which talks about this incident in detail. I would recommend you watch it if you're interested. This leads us to the second reason why creativity is so difficult, and that is groupthink. When we work in groups in organizations, it's very difficult to think differently, and even if some people do think differently, they might not speak up and rather conform to what the group decides. The final reason why creativity is difficult is fear of failure. Google led a 2-year research project with 280 teams, and they found only one distinction between creative and non-creative teams, and that was psychological safety. Hence, people will only be creative if they feel safe to take risks. Let's move on to the ways Google inspires its employees to be creative. They make it a valued part of the way people think, the way they work, and the way they interact every single day. To understand creativity in Google, I've broken it down into 2 questions. How does Google foster an environment for creativity? And after fostering an environment for creativity, how does Google actually tap into the team's collective creativity? Let's start with the first question. How does Google foster an environment for creativity? There are 5 attributes that Google believes contribute to the use and development of new ideas. The first one, shared vision. Having a shared vision is important so that everyone knows the sort of problems and challenges you're setting out to solve. Google has OKRs, that is, objectives and key results that they set at the company, team, and individual level. The second point is a combination of autonomy and mentoring that is given to employees. Google employees are given autonomy in their work, but at the same time, managers are there to guide them. The third point, intrinsic motivation. Google inspires their employees to be naturally curious. After all, creativity arises from curiosity. The fourth point is risk-taking. You need to normalize failure in your organization, and that sends a powerful message to everyone in the company that it's okay to fail as long as you learn from it. Share what you've learned and make plans to do better. The fifth and final point is collaboration and connection. Google makes it a point to collaborate across the organization. Now, since this is a short talk, I'm going to only talk about points 2, 4, and 5 because I think Google does things a little differently when it comes to points 2, 4, and 5. Let's start with point 2, autonomy and mentoring. The best way to empower employees to be creative is to allow them autonomy to take ownership of their work, but at the same time, managers advise and guide their employees. Probably one of the biggest factors that lead to job satisfaction is the effectiveness of your boss, which in turn affects creativity. Google has done a research project known as Project Oxygen, where they looked into the common qualities of their high-performing managers. Now, a small exercise. If everyone can take out a piece of paper and a pen, you see 10 qualities listed on the slide. These are 10 qualities of a manager. Now, I'm sure everyone on the call is either a manager or reports to a manager. So, if you can envision all the qualities that you think are important in a manager and rank these points. So, rank 1 as the quality you think is most important, and rank 10 as the quality you think is least important. So, for example, if I was doing this exercise, my manager being a good coach is what is most important to me. I give that a rank of 1. And say my manager being a strong decision maker is what is least important to me, then I give that a rank of 10. So 10 qualities, a rank from 1 to 10. So if everyone can just take 2 minutes and think through this exercise. Any questions, feel free to ask.
Actually, there is one question. You can see it in the question section.
Right. I think if there's any questions specific to this exercise, please do ask. Other questions, I think I can take that at the end.
Sure.
So now let's move on to the results of what the Google research found. What they found was this ranking order. They found that being a good coach was the most important, followed by a manager that empowers the team and does not micromanage, followed by a manager that creates an inclusive team environment, shows concern for success and well-being. And what they found was least important in their research was managers that collaborate across Google is a strong decision maker. So I hope this exercise was eye-opening and an interesting piece of advice for everyone on the call. Now let's move on to the fourth point of how Google fosters an environment for creativity, and that is risk-taking. They empower their employees to feel safe when taking risks. And how they do this is via an exercise called pre-mortem. So pre-mortem is an exercise where even before the project begins, teams come together to talk about all the possible ways a project could fail. This type of discussion helps to normalize failure by talking about it openly, and importantly, can provide the benefits of learning from failure while avoiding the pain of actually failing. Google also has this toolkit to instill psychological safety in teams. Since this is a short talk, I will not get into detail about this, but I'll be happy to share a link to this resource after the talk. The fifth point, connection and collaboration. Google is famous for its 20% rule. The 20% rule is how Google encourages their employees to spend 20% of their time doing side projects. So as you can see in this picture, the organizational structure of Google is very interconnected. You can see a lot of crisscross lines across departments, across levels. And as a result of the 20% rule, a core product like Gmail was born. The second point is their secret social code, and that is equal talking. So what they found is that the most successful teams are those in which each person talks and contributes equally. In a group, sometimes the hippo, or the highest paid person's opinion, tends to dominate, and everyone feels compelled to go with their opinion. This is essentially groupthink. One way to overcome this is whenever there is a group discussion, encourage your youngest employee or the most reserved employee or your employee with the least experience to talk first. These would be the people who are most likely to conform to the hippo's point of view if the hippo manages to talk first. Another way is whenever there is a group decision to be made, always use secret ballots instead of asking open questions like, is there anyone with a different point of view? People are more likely to be honest with their opinions anonymously rather than expecting them to speak up at a group discussion. Finally, invest in diversity. We all know diversity is important, and Google has found that the best collaborations come from a diverse team. Now we come to the end of how Google fosters an environment for creativity. Let's talk about how Google taps into the collective creativity of a team with design thinking. Design thinking is one approach that combines creativity and structure to solve big problems. Now, to understand why Google did this, let me tell you a story. Jake Knapp, a Googler, was traveling to Sweden one weekend to meet with some of the company's engineers with the hope of creating a new video chat platform. Three days later, a working version of the Google Hangouts was born. When he looked backwards, he thought, wow, those 3 days were worth 6 months, or even 9 months. How can I reproduce that? So using the Sweden experience as a blueprint, Knapp broke down his technique into a 5-day method he dubbed as the design sprint. So what Knapp recommends before you get started is to put together a team of 7 for this sprint. More than 7 means things slow down. Less than 7 means you don't get enough diverse opinions. On day 1, on Monday, the team understands the goal. On day 1, the team comes together and instead of solving the problem, they actually define it. Collectively, the team understands the problem at hand. On day 2, on Tuesday, the team diverges and come up with multiple solutions. Knapp doesn't like brainstorming. He feels that in brainstorming sessions, people tend to favor the craziest ideas without thinking about how they can actually be accomplished, or even worse, the winner is simply the loudest person in the group. Instead, Knapp prefers what he refers to as parallel individual work. Each person sits down with a pencil and paper and sketches out the idea. On day 3, on Wednesday, the team comes back and their sketches are taped onto a wall and they remain anonymous. The ideas are studied, the participants go around the room and put stickers on ideas that they like. Then they sit down, the solutions are discussed one at a time, and then they choose the idea or the combination of ideas which they like, and with that, the team moves forward. On day 4, they build a prototype. One day actually sounds a little intimidating to build an entire prototype, but Knapp points out that you probably already have everything you need. You already have a previous prototype that you can just redesign. On the 5th day, you test it, you validate your idea. Research shows that 5 is the perfect number of customers on which you should test your product. On the final day, pick 5 customers who will spend an hour using the prototype and give feedback. Now, the beauty of the 5-day sprint is that there's minimal pressure to choose the perfect solution. Even if it's a disaster, you've only lost 5 days, not several months. With that, we come to the end of part 1. Let's move on to part 2. How did Uber solve the chicken and egg problem? Anyone who knows what the chicken and egg problem is and wants to speak up?
Hey, hi. I might know it's about which one is first, or what do you do first, or what comes first?
Exactly. Exactly. That you've said that correctly. So it's a perplexing question that we all have thought about at some point, right? What comes first? Is that the chicken or is it the egg? So if you think about it, every marketplace is a chicken and egg problem. Every marketplace has two sets of players, the suppliers and the consumers. Both sides don't find value on the marketplace without the other. The supplier will not be interested to come onto the marketplace unless there are enough buyers. In the same way, the buyer will not be interested to come onto the market unless there are enough suppliers. So for Uber, the chicken and egg problem is very real. When the business started, cab drivers would not come onto the platform unless they found enough passengers. On the same hand, passengers would not come onto the Uber platform unless there were enough drivers. Now there are multiple ways, essentially the chicken and egg problem. So there are multiple ways you can solve the chicken and egg problem. Here are 4 famous examples. So what Uber did was they did double subsidization. They encouraged and incentivized both sides, that is, the driver and the rider, simultaneously to come on to the platform. I will talk about Uber in a little more detail on the next slide, but let's move on to the second way and the second method on how you can solve the chicken and egg problem, and that is what Quora did. What Quora did is they acquired high-value users first. So high-value users are those users whose participation will bring in extra value on the platform, and they will be able to attract other users to interact with them. So when Quora started, it was an invite-only platform, and only few people got the opportunity to check out the website. These few were successful people from Silicon Valley. Their popularity and their exclusive voices made Quora very successful through word of mouth. Now, the third strategy you can use to solve the chicken and egg problem is the piggyback strategy. That's what Airbnb did. So, emerging companies often piggyback on the activity of an established company to gain traction. Airbnb effectively piggybacked Craigslist's network to build its own. Airbnb extracted the contact information of property owners on Craigslist and then sent them a pitch to list on Airbnb as well. The strategy worked very well. With nothing to lose, the property owners only felt that they would double their chances of finding a renter if they agreed to list on both platforms. In this way, Airbnb had a ready supply of homes with which it could attract customers. Now the final and the fourth way.
Nitya, I'm sorry, short question. So this is very interesting. So that's why I'm asking the question. So did they find the property owners and they reached out over like an email in the sense of like.
Can't hear you, Rahul.
Can you hear me now? Hello.
Yeah.
Yeah. So my question is,
yes.
did Airbnb, found the people who owns properties? They send them postals. What did they do? How did they reach out?
So the first problem that Airbnb found was that they couldn't get the contact information of the property owners. So Craigslist was their competitor at that time. But the problem was that property owners didn't find the website experience on Craigslist it's very, very, very good. So they had the user experience on Craigslist wasn't good. So what Airbnb did was they extracted the data from Craigslist and sent them a pitch to Airbnb. And property owners found Airbnb to look attractive. It had better user experience, and they just felt, wow, this is just another platform where I could advertise. So why not try it out?
Okay, so you mean they're email advertisements, right? So I'm just trying to understand the mechanism.
Right.
So it has to be an email, right?
They emailed the property owner.
Okay, got it. Right. Thanks.
Right. So the fourth way on how you can solve the chicken and egg problem, and that's what Amazon did. They started as a one-side business. So Amazon successfully solved the chicken and egg problem by attracting only one side of the market first, and that was by attracting the everyday customer like us. So when Amazon started, it was only reselling books, which allowed them to create value for consumers without having any other sellers participate in the marketplace directly. So once they had a strong consumer base, they then diversified and allowed other sellers also to participate in the marketplace directly. So these are the 4 ways. Let's look into how Uber used double subsidization. So Uber made double subsidization work by incentivizing both the cab driver as well as the passenger. So they focused on the supply side, that is the cab drivers, by offering them $1,000 sign up and referral bonus to lure them away from legacy taxi companies. And when they launched, they even paid cab drivers even when they were not transporting customers. Then they incentivized the other side, that is the rider of Uber cars, that is passengers. They incentivize passengers by providing a differentiated driving experience, and they focused on quality, which them discounts and free rides. But when it comes to Uber, the struggle is not over. Essentially, for the platform to be valuable, there needs to be riders and drivers on the platform simultaneously. Only then is there value. So it's a constant struggle for Uber, and the story is not over. So if you look at Uber, their drivers are not Uber employees with their
It's not
schedules.
visible. Sorry.
Sorry, was somebody saying something?
Yeah, your presentation is not visible. Also, someone is saying that we can't hear you. So, can you refresh the screen, please?
Sure. Can you hear me now?
Yes.
Okay, let me try presenting again.
Okay.
Can you hear? Can you see now?
Yes.
Right. Where did you lose me? Did I talk about how
We lost from where you said about incentivizing the riders.
Okay, so I think I was here.
Okay.
Okay, so I was talking about how Uber simultaneously incentivizes the driver as well as the rider. And ways that they've done this is by offering $1,000 sign-up bonus to cab drivers to lure them away from legacy taxi companies.
One second, Nitya. Can you just refresh the your airmeet window?
Okay, sure. Hi, can you hear me now?
Yes. Try presenting the screen.
Sure, yeah. You can see, right? Sahil?
Yep. We can.
Okay. Sure. Sure. So I was talking about how Uber uses double subsidization, and the way they did this is by simultaneously incentivizing both sides of the marketplace, that is, the rider as well as the driver, to come onto the platform. So the way that they incentivized the drivers is by offering $1,000 sign-up bonus, and they actually also paid the drivers even when they were not transporting passengers. On the other hand, they also incentivized the passengers, the riders, by providing a differentiated driving service. They felt that they would make passengers keep coming back to Uber if they provided a quality driving experience. experience, and they also tempted passengers with free rides and discounts. But when it comes to Uber, this is not the end of the story. For Uber to be valuable, it needs to keep incentivizing the rider and the driver over and over again to be on the platform. Otherwise, the value of Uber is not there. So, for Uber, it's a constant struggle. Let's understand why. So, when it comes to Uber drivers are not employees of Uber. Instead, they are individuals who can choose to be on the platform at their convenience. This means Uber cannot compel drivers to show up at a specific time and a specific place. So this lack of control can cause a lot of problems for a company whose goal is to transport passengers whenever and wherever they want. On the other hand, the rider's biggest pain point is the wait. To understand why the wait plays such a crucial role, we need to look at the peak end rule. So, the peak end rule says that people judge an experience based on how they felt at its peak and at its end, and not the average of every experience, not the average of every moment of the experience. So, this is essentially the science behind an unforgettable customer experience. For brands, this means that customers will only remember the experience based on two moments: the peak, that is the best or the worst part of the experience, as well as the very end of the experience. So, in order to solve this problem, what Uber does is it uses behavioral science. So, Uber has a behavioral science team. It's known as the Uber Labs team. Their mission is to leverage behavioral science to build programs and products that are intuitive and enjoyable for customers. So how the behavioral science team works is they first understand the problem at hand. In this step, they collaborate with product managers, engineers, and designers. Then they conduct a behavioral science deep dive into the problem at hand. So after the deep dive, they work with partner teams to prioritize ideas based on impact and potential risk. Finally, they run experiments to test their ideas. Now, a very short case study on how Uber uses behavioral science. Let's look at Express Pool. So in early 2018, Uber launched Express Pool. So similar to their other products, Express Pool involves sharing a ride with other riders who are headed in the same direction. But unlike their other products, Express Pool includes extra wait time between requesting and matching with the car, as well as a short walk to the pickup location. So these changes create a straighter, more efficient route, which in turn leads to a more affordable trip. But the problem was riders were accustomed to quicker matching and a door-to-door experience. So the product team was paying close attention to the riders' use of the new product. And what the team found was that riders were cancelling their trips in between requesting it and matching it, the period that included the extra wait time, at a higher rate compared to their other products. So now the behavioral science team was called in, and then they did a deep dive. And they found three concepts that led to people cancelling their rides. The first one, idleness aversion. The concept that people hate being idle and they constantly want to be busy. The second is operational transparency. People want to know what's going behind the scenes. The third is goal gradient effect, and this describes that there's a greater motivation in the goal pursuit when people feel like they're advancing well towards the objective. So using these three concepts, the behavioral science team came up with a recommendation, and what they recommended was highlighting progress during the wait times by explaining each granular step going behind the scenes. So they started showing additional information like explaining the arrival time estimate calculation, etc. And what they found was a staggering 11% reduction in the cancellation rate. So this leads us to a very, very key question. Behavioral science plays a very fine line separating customer experience and the company profits. On one hand, Uber improves customer experience when it makes product improvements based on behavioral science, as we saw in the Express pool example. But on the other hand, Uber also uses behavioral science to allegedly hook people onto the platform to increase their profits. It has been claimed that Uber experiments with their drivers to determine the most effective strategies for keeping them on the road as long as possible. Drivers almost end up like gamblers at a casino, urged to play just a little longer despite the odds. Uber is also claimed to manipulate rider behavior. If the app recognizes that you are drunk or in a neighborhood you rarely travel to, one that data shows is high in crime, it charges you a higher rate, knowing you're unlikely to refuse. Uber also knows that its users are more likely to pay for surge pricing if the battery is low on their phones.
Okay, Nitya, there's a couple of questions actually.
Sure.
Question section before you go to the
Yeah.
next company.
Sure.
I have answers for some of them.
Okay. But I think the questions were related to Google, right?
No, actually go to the question section. There's a separate section called questions.
Yeah. My last question was posted at 6:17 p.m. Maybe.
Oh, okay. So Abhinav is asking in case of the chicken. Okay, so Abhinav's question is basically saying, well, you're incentivizing the user, you are incentivizing the driver. How
Right.
is the sustainable model going over, right?
Right.
Isn't that a temporary solution? Is that what is asking?
Right. So essentially, the chicken and egg problem is that initial lack of inertia of the riders and the drivers to come onto the platform. So once both you incentivize both to come onto the platform, then essentially network effects start coming into play. So once you already have a significant amount of drivers and riders, you then tap into network effects, which means that there will always be a certain amount of drivers on the platform and there will always be a certain number of passengers on the platform. So it's that initial problem to get them onto the platform. And this, the using double subsidization, you can overcome that initial problem.
Yeah, and again, this is not something was started by Uber, right? And it is even from PayPal days or even before that. The initial idea is for any of these startups at this stage, right? The idea is how much revenue can you eventually generate, right?
Right.
Can your company only make 10 million in revenue, or can your company really make 100 million, or even go beyond, right? So the ability to generate cash, and to do that, you need to actually incentivize a bunch of users and bring them on board. And like Nitya said, right, they will eventually be a bunch of them will eventually leave, by the but a bunch of them would stay. Um, and 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 from that, and you have a calculation also saying, well, if even if you bring in 100 users, well, eventually 20 will stay. But then we need to make profitability, or you need to build a business out of that. And the problem which happens is some of these calculations will go wrong at some cases. That's where things go into a real bad stage.
Right. Yeah, that's a perfect answer. So, Abhinav, I hope that answers your question. I'll be happy to answer as many questions at the end. So, let me move on to the conclusion for Uber. Platforms like Uber should actually avoid nudging users to make irrational decisions by manipulating their emotions. People should be able to make choices on the platform freely and easily. So my personal and my biggest takeaway from Uber's story is that we all have tremendous potential with the technology we have at our disposal. As we all develop algorithms and products to make our lives easier, it's also important to think about the far-reaching consequences of what we do. I feel like sometimes we leave the accountability of ethics to the top management of the company, but it's also crucial to know that our individual efforts make an impact and that it's up to us individuals to decide right from wrong. And with that, we come to the end of part 2. Let's move on to part 3, the final part. And part 3, we talk about how Netflix overcame the innovator's dilemma. Now, the innovator's dilemma, a term that was popularized by Harvard professor Clayton Christensen in 1997. He terms this as the reason why successful companies fail in the face of disruptive innovation. So, in order to understand what exactly the innovator's dilemma is, let's look at sustaining innovation and disruptive innovation and what the difference between them is. The innovator's dilemma lies at the crux between the two. So, sustaining innovation improves existing products. It does not create a new market, but develops existing products with better value. It's an incremental approach where companies listen to existing customers to improve the performance of their product. On the other hand, disruptive innovation creates a new market. Disruptive innovation goes after a niche market that is often overlooked by the existing player. It's a new business model that is more affordable, more convenient, or simpler than the existing offering. The new offering might not match the existing offering on traditional performance criteria. It might have more defects, slower performance, but the ignored customers don't really care. They prefer the affordability and the accessibility of the new offering. So in a sense, the difference between the two is that sustaining innovation is aimed at the customer's current needs, whereas disruptive innovation is aimed at the customer's future needs. As you can see in the graph, disruptive innovation starts small. It caters to the demands of the least demanding customers. A disruptive product appears as if it's doing everything wrong, but eventually takes more and more of the market, eventually displacing the incumbent. Now, the innovator's dilemma is the decision that businesses must take between either catering to the customer's current needs or adopting new innovations and technologies that will answer their future needs. So often companies are at crossroads and unsure of which path to take, which is the innovator's dilemma. We've seen a lot of real-world examples of disruptive innovations wiping out an existing market. Uber has made traditional taxis almost non-existent in some places. Airbnb's become a cheaper, more convenient convenient alternative to traditional hotels. All the examples on the screen are companies that have used disruption and displaced the incumbent in the market. So now let's look at what Netflix did. So when Netflix started, it started in 1997, and it was a DVD by mail business. Netflix didn't have any physical stores and only mailed DVDs to their customers. At that time, Blockbuster was the biggest company in the market. Blockbuster had many physical stores which provided video rentals. So when Netflix started, people thought the Netflix business model was focused exclusively on distribution. And most people saw Netflix as nothing more than just a convenient way of renting movies. But in 2011, the company announced that it was spinning off its traditional DVD rental business as a separate company called Quickster. The original company, Netflix, carried on as a streaming-only firm. This was a real risk for Netflix, even though its core business was growing and performing strongly. Their core business of the DVD rental business was growing strongly, Netflix instead decided to invest time and money building a streaming product for which there was no consumer demand at that time. And few people thought that the idea would even work. However, because hardly anyone thought that it would work, few companies were actively pursuing it. By the time everybody else caught on, Netflix had the best streaming technology. The primary reason why Netflix is disruptive is that when it launched, it didn't go after the core customers of competitors like Blockbuster. Netflix went after a niche market of customers who didn't care about new releases and who were online shoppers. This is a hallmark of disruption. A disruptive company targets segments of the population that have been overlooked by competitors, delivering an inferior alternative, often at a lower price. Then, then eventually, a disruptive company like Netflix moves upmarket. It keeps the advantages it had at the beginning and adds the things that mainstream customers want. And all of a sudden, there is no reason to have Blockbuster anymore. So Netflix is certainly an inspirational story. Teaches us that as companies, we either have the option to disrupt or be disrupted. As companies, we need to listen to our customers in order to continue successfully with sustaining innovation, but also need to look at niche markets to identify disruptive technologies. I think what is most inspiring about Netflix is that they pursue the idea of streaming video, even though it was a threat to their existing business model of distributing DVDs. By contrast, most companies think small. They try to protect their existing business, even if they can see a long term threat from the internet or any other technological disruptor. Second point, Rome wasn't built in a day. Some things take time to play out. So when Netflix decided to go via the on-demand streaming route, there was huge backlash. They lost about 800,000 subscribers soon after that, and everyone thought it was a big mistake. But a decade later, we see that the move really paid off. And finally, it's a story of encouragement for all of our startups. It's good news. The Netflix story teaches us that as long as the startup business model has the potential to improve performance rapidly, it's a good thing that the initial market is small. This gives startups more time to fine-tune technology and don't really need to worry about their larger competitor. After all, a small target market can be the start of something really big. And with that, we come to the end of the talk. I hope you found the practices at Google, Netflix, and Uber to be interesting. Thank you for listening, and I hope you enjoyed the talk.
Hey, good stuff, by the way. Hey, anyone want to introduce? I see a lot of people from outside. Hey, anyone wants to say hi? Introduce yourself. We have like 3-4 minutes more. You can just press the uh, you know there's a button which will let you be a speaker.
I think you can take the questions. There are a bunch of questions by
Yeah. So questions. Okay, I think the chat. Where are these questions? No, we're amazing book by Netflix here. If anyone wants to know more about Netflix also.
It's in the question section. If you want, I can read out.
Hey, from my understanding, here is that looks like it's Yeah. So, Mayank, the question of incentivizing, right? It, if you're incentivizing users to onboard them, only those businesses which is giving an elevated experience than what was before. For instance, we used to pay by cash. Okay, paying by cash, which was very comfortable, by the way, and then we moved to a different experience of UPI, right? The UPI actually gives you a much more elevated experience. So people stick with their elevated experience. They would not go back to the previous experience. But that's not exactly the same with drive sharing, right? You have to understand, calling an auto rickshaw, stopping on the road and calling an auto rickshaw is still fast, right? But the comfort of Uber is that, well, if you have waiting time, you can sit at home and then call the Uber thing. So the problem is, a bunch of people who have gone to Uber are still comfortable with the previous experience, so they'll fall back. But in case of UPI, they would not fall back because UPI is much more elevated experience. So there's actually a wonderful talk by, I think, I forgot the name of the person, where they put this. I mean, if your business is an X category, how do you define what you have to spend, and if you eventually spend, will those customers be retained, right? And it's all based on the experience you are able to give them, the elevated experience you are able to give them. Right, hand button. Hey, someone is asking. Anyone wants to raise hand, speak? Any other questions?
Hello, can you guys hear me?
Right. Yeah.
So I have a question. So, like with the case of Uber, so they decided that customer experience is important, and like in the case of Apple, when Steve Jobs was the CEO, so so the designers would heavily put emphasis on aesthetics, and the engineers would try to contradict. I mean, try to argue with the designers that this is not possible, and particular design is very expensive. So my question is like how how does a company make a decision whether to make this thing like make a particular product profitable rather than just elevating the user experience and not actually focusing on how to make money out of it and just focusing on what customer really wants.
Right. I think great question. Um, it's always a question between, do you improve customer experience or do you go after your profits? I think that depends from company to company. Rahul, do you want to talk about how you manage this conflict in CloudSEK?
Rahul is actually out of stage. I think I have to give.
I lost the question. Can you quickly give the question? Uh, I didn't get the question actually. I was away.
Yeah, sure. So my question is like for a company who has a great product, so they might have two options. One option would be to not focus on the profitability of the product rather than just improve the user experience, which might be expensive, and the company might not have enough funds maybe to invent or to innovate those particular features into their main product. So how does a company or the product manager for that like
Well,
make a
yeah,
decision?
yeah, yeah. Yeah, no, it's still a chicken and egg problem, by the way, right? I mean, see, as if you're building something, you would never be satisfied with what you're building, to be, which means you will always feel that um, you are in a paradox, which you think that you are always way beyond a lot of other people. The problem, the idea here is, well, with whatever you have, you need to confidently go into the market and keep selling, and you need to parallelly build and improve these experience. If you're thinking that, well, I'm going to spend 1 year without no sales and I'll only just focus on building the product, well, that's wrong, because see, a lot of feedbacks which is coming into the products are actually coming from the customers, which is in the end, it's in the end user, right? Whatever the product is. So if you're not constantly battling with them, then you would not be able to move forward. So that's point number one. Point number two is, well, see, eventually it's all about how much money can this business make, right? you will have to show profitability or revenue making 2 years down the line. If that is your plan, well, you can actually say, well, this year I'm only focusing this much money. I'm not going to focus way too much. Okay, but next year I will double it, because by that time I will be stabilizing a lot of my technology part, right? So your plan and your forecast for the future is in a way a reflection, and that's actually the story you're telling to investors also, right? You're telling, well, I'm only going to do this, but 2 years down the line I'll do this much, but in this period which I'm making this much revenue, I need to fix these many problems. Once I fix these many problems, next year I'll have a different target altogether, right? But without revenue, um, it's not possible for first time entrepreneurs. It is possible for second time entrepreneurs. If you look at, just giving an example, Steve Jobs in the first Apple they built, they were selling constantly. They, whatever version they had, they were on the market selling it from day one, sort of, right? But if you look at the second one, next version, which Steve Jobs made enough money out of Apple, they went to next and he started another company. They were not selling from day one, right? They have now figured out they have enough cash in bank to do a bunch of these things. So if you're a first time entrepreneur, you need to be in the market, you need to be building and you need to be selling parallelly. If you're a second time entrepreneur, you have the leverage and you have the cash and the contacts to push some of these targets. Hope I answered that.
Yeah, well said, Rahul.
Yeah. All right, guys. So I think we're done. Hey, Vinay, this is pretty good. I'm glad we have recorded it. So hey, Abhinav, hey man, hi.
Hey Rahul, hey Nitya, thank you so much, folks. This was an amazing session. Like actually a lot of wisdom out there. And my apologies, I had too many
No
questions
worries.
to ask.
Feel
Um,
free to ask.
I
Yeah,
was just sure. I was just wondering if there's any possibility I could possibly get the answers to some of these questions offline.
sure.
I mean, like at whenever you folks have time, I would really appreciate that.
Yeah, Abhinav, we'll be posting this on our forum, so that there Nitya can answer.
Great, that's great. Yeah, I think and a wonderful session. Thank you so much, Nitya, and thanks Rahul for sharing the
Cool,
experience
man.
as well.
Cool, man. The community, we can ask more questions. There's an option, and we can interact and do more things. Or
Sure.
you can
Yeah,
reach out to Nitya or
Yeah,
LinkedIn.
free. Yeah.
absolutely.
Thanks, Abhinav.
Thank you.
Cool, man. Thanks, guys. Thank you. Thanks,
Thank
Nitya.
you. Thank you, everyone. Thanks for joining.
Thank you, guys. We'll post the link on the chat. Thank you, guys. Bye.